Thank you. Moving on, with regard to Cuba, as you know, I've been very supportive of what the administration has done. I'm pleased that we are going to establish diplomatic relations. You mentioned that that is accounted for in the budget. It's not an increased budgetary amount, is it, to establish an embassy in Havana?
No, it's not.
Okay, good. I think a lot of people don't realize we have
find a pre-painted sign in the basement of the current interest section and just put it up.
I'd say that only because some people don't realize that we have quite a vibrant mission there now that's been operating for quite a while.
And by the way, Senator, thank you for your thoughtfulness on this and your support for it. We appreciate it. We appreciate Senator Udall likewise being involved on this.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do think that there are still severe problems in Cuba, obviously, and human rights issues, but I think that they can most effectively be pursued if we have diplomatic relations. So I agree with the administration there. With regard to Iran, for a minute, I've been also supportive of the administration pursuing negotiations, and I've withheld support for increased sanctions during that time because I think the administration needs and deserves the space to pursue every opportunity for an agreement, and I still am hopeful that a good agreement will come. Having said that, as one who served in the Senate for nearly 30 years, do you feel that the Senate and the House, the Congress, should have a vote on that agreement in the end, or some kind of approval or disapproval, as the chairman has suggested with legislation?
Well, I have no doubt that Congress will find plenty of ways to approve or disapprove. You have a vote, because ultimately the sanctions that Congress has put in place will not be lifted unless Congress lifts them. So
but they can be provisionally lifted or waived for a
well, the president can waive
them,
but you ultimately are the ones who have to terminate them, and at some point in time they have to make a decision whether that has to happen or not. But let me just go one step further, philosophically and practically. This is much like a sort of labor agreement and TPA and things like that. If you're hanging out there as the sort of approval people, then that's another layer of negotiation. And fundamentally, it complicates it, hardens positions, makes the negotiating more difficult. There's this looming other entity out there. I think the president feels very strongly that, you know, you'll have a sense of whether that's a good agreement or a bad agreement, and there are plenty of ways that Congress can weigh in on that, but we don't think it needs to be formalized in some prearranged way that makes the negotiation more difficult. By the way, you know, when we finish this, if we finish it, and look, I'm telling you, we got some tough issues in front of us. There are no guarantees here. Some very tough issues. And we're adamant about not doing a deal that can't withstand scrutiny. And it's not just going to be your scrutiny. Every other country in this, we have France, Germany, Britain, China, Russia, all at the table, all with powerful feelings about nonproliferation and what ought to be done here. That's sort of a first barrier. In addition, we have scientists all over the world. Our nuclear scientist community is going to have to look at this and say, does it make sense? If they're clobbering this, then we got a problem, obviously. So we're being very thoughtful and very careful. We're running things by people. We're talking to them, what works, what doesn't. We're taking advice. We've had exchanges with all of you through this process. We're well warned as to sort of, you know, where the thresholds are and what's difficult. In the end, the president will have to make a tough judgment if we get an agreement. But it is not certain yet that, you know, they're prepared to meet whatever we think this important standard is that has to be met to meet all of these judgments and conclude. But I'm not going to go into all the pluses and minuses of this right now. There are powerful, powerful reasons for why this is better done diplomatically than otherwise. And there are powerful reasons for how this winds up being a better way to prevent them from getting a bomb than some other way. And when we get into that discussion, I look forward to it. But this is not the moment for it, nor the place for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I would just say that, as you've said in the past, it does have to pass muster with Congress. You've been on the record in that way, and I doubt there's any body of any of these other countries that has actually passed through their parliament. We pass through Congress. It's a very unique situation, and I hope we will figure out a way to have a role in saying grace over this before the regime is totally dissipates. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to Secretary Kerry for all of the great work that you've been doing and for being here today. I want to start first with asking about our humanitarian efforts to assist Syria in particular, and Jordan, and also Lebanon, as we look at the threat from ISIS and the support that we've gotten, particularly from partners like Jordan and Lebanon, who are really struggling under the refugees in their countries, and ask if you could talk a little bit about what we're requesting in the budget to address that, and what we hope that will do.
Sure. Well, Senator, I'm really glad you asked that, because I think this is one of the reasons why we all have to really buckle down and figure out how we're going to come together around the next, around the Syria component of this. Because the truth of the matter is that as Syria is disintegrating under the pressure of this sectarian struggle, 3/4 of the people of Syria are now displaced. And about half of those 3/4 are displaced in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. Turkey can assimilate more effectively. Lebanon is a problem. Jordan is an even bigger problem. And this has a major impact on Jordan's economy, on its social structure, its politics. You know, you have these vast number, many of whom are in the camps, but many of whom are not in the camps. And so they're permeating Jordanian society. They go out and get a job. They work for a heck of a lot less. That puts pressure on the labor market, creates a lot of dissent. They come in, tend to an apartment, and they all throw in whatever they have, and they'll rent the apartment, but they'll rent it for more than it would have been rented for to a normal person or family. So all of these distortions are taking place, not to mention that with them can come some dangerous politics in these places. So we believe that this pressure on Jordan is a reason to really try to work harder to find the way forward to get some kind of political resolution out of Syria. Now, we continue to believe that and adamantly, there's no military solution here. You pursue some sort of real scatterbrained military solution, you could have a total implosion, and ISIL could wind up with Syria, or ISIL and Nusra together. You could have any number of outcomes that are very, very dangerous. So what we're trying to figure out is, you know, what's the road to that diplomatic outcome? And we're pursuing that. I will tell you, I won't go into the details with you, but we're actively talking with the players in the region. It's one of the reasons one of the topics we'll have at the GCC meeting this Friday is sort of how do we get there? And beating ISIL is a key part of that.
I appreciate that, and certainly agree with what you're saying. My question really is more about what our humanitarian efforts look like. For example, just recently the State Department announced an additional $125 million in assistance to the UN World Food Program, which, as we know, ran out of funding at the end of last year at a time when that funding was particularly critical to some of the humanitarian efforts in places like Jordan and Lebanon. So how can we avoid having that kind of situation happen again, and what kind of negotiations, pressure, whatever we want to call it, are we entering into with the UN so that that does not happen again?
Well, the shortfall itself to the UN World Food Program?
Right.
Unfortunately, people who've made pledges aren't stepping up, and the demand is increasing. And this has reached, it's the largest humanitarian crisis on the planet today, and it's going to get worse. I'm sitting here, this is part of the frustration. It's going to get worse. Now, we are the largest single donor in the world, and we should be proud of that. More than $3 billion we've put on the table since 2011. It's more than any other donor. And we've got $2 million that just recently went into the Red Crescent, the Turkish Red Crescent, to provide hut meals to Syrians, the refugees from Kobani. We put $33 million into the World Food Program and other partners because of the emergency needs. It's not sustainable. And it's one of the reasons why we are looking at this question of Syria and other things with great urgency right now as to what other alternatives may be available.
The 2016 budget requests $2.2 billion for work at our embassies, and I understand that that's in response to the recommendations of the ARB following the Benghazi attack. Can you talk about how that will get prioritized if sequestration goes into effect? I mean, where does that happen on the, or fall out on the list of priorities?
It's the highest priority in the State Department is protecting our people, and we've closed on 25 of the 29 ARB recommendations. There are 4 Benghazi ARB recommendations that remain open. We're actively working to close them. There are things that take longer to implement. It's not that they haven't been attended to, it's just that they don't close because it takes a lot longer to do them. We have a major number of high-threat locations that are undergoing renovation in various places. Huge expenditures in Kabul right now to harden down that place, particularly given the drawdown. You can you can run the list of places easily in your heads as to where most of this work is going. But I made the decision with the President's consent to do the drawdown in Yemen because we weren't able to do diplomacy. And most of the people we had there were people protecting the few people who were trying to do diplomacy. It just didn't make sense. So we're doing it from a distance. We're not going away. And by the way, our facilities are being used by the UN and protected. Our computers are not accessible, and we destroyed all the classified information. It was done in a very orderly way over a period of 4 or 5 days with a very well-managed exit that was done through commercial air, not in some panic. And I'm really proud of the people who pulled that off. But we're not going to leave people at risk in these chaotic kind of situations, which is the same thing we did in Tripoli. But in many of these places, before you get to that stage, we've got to take steps to increase perimeters, harden buildings, do things so that there's no risk of negligence with respect to anything might flow. And that's where those priorities are going into that subset. I'd rather not talk about specific places in public because it begins to flag things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Perdue.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here, and thank you for your illustrious service here over 30 years. Puts you in a unique perspective to talk to us today. I want to come back to your comments in your opening. I agree with you so much. I just believe we are at a moment of challenge. I mean, I see this as a very dangerous world. I respect so much what you're doing in this position to try to deal with that. You also mentioned that we need to lead, and I couldn't agree with that more. But I see 2 things you've also mentioned as well that really create challenges, and I sense the frustration in your testimony today relating to one of these. And first of all, this national security crisis relative to the threats, not just abroad, but even here at home, relative to the threats abroad between a nuclear Iran, an ISIL that is really running rampant around the Middle East and threatening even our homeland, and then, of course, what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia. But you mentioned also our fiscal irresponsibility and what the questions that raises around the world relative to our ability to back up our agreements, our ability to fund our military, and our ability to really live up to the leadership role that has been thrust upon us. You know, you mentioned budget constraints, and listen, I recognize that frustration. As an outsider, I see this fairly uniquely as someone new to the process, but I'd like to get your sense of priorities, particularly on, and just one example of how you see in this budgeting process relative to all that we just mentioned and all that you've talked about. How do you determine priorities and our ability to really do what we've got to do against your objectives? And one is a specific. I spent last week in Israel, and I stood on the Golan Heights, and I looked across into Syria, and I saw these 3 villages where fighting is going on, and it's a very confused space. But then I went to the West Bank, and I saw both sides of that equation. You know, in 2016 budget, the administration is requesting almost $500 million in aid to the Palestinian territories of both Gaza and West Bank. Earlier this year, the Palestinian Authority was allowed access to the International Criminal Court. And this is a troubling position that they'll no doubt try to, they'll attempt to use to bring charges against Israel. But independently yesterday, and this leads to my question, a federal district court in Manhattan ruled that the Palestinian Authority, independently, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization were both liable for their role in knowingly supporting 6 terrorist attacks in Israel between 2004 and 2006, actually in which Americans were killed. So my question is, that $500 million that's being requested there, could that be used in different ways to deal with some of the things that you're talking about, certainly on some of the social media counterbalance with ISIL and some of the cybersecurity issues you've talked about? It's a small number, but it's a principal thing. And my question is how do you see that very complex priority set as you try to develop the highest and best use for your budget?
Great question, Senator, and I want to tackle both parts of it. With respect to the $450 million, $500 that you talk about to the Palestinians, you asked bluntly, could it better go to something else, and the answer is no. Of the $450 million budget support for the Palestinian Authority, $425 million goes to Israeli institutions, including utilities and creditors of the PA. So effectively, it's going to Israel. It's not going to Palestine, but it helps Palestinians to survive. Now, why is that important? It's critical. If the Palestinian Authority were to fail, and I warned about this in London the other day because they're not getting the transfer of the tax revenues because they're going to the ICC, but if they were to fail, what takes their place? Hamas? Jihad? I don't know. I just know that as troublesome as they have been in certain respects at many times, that President Abbas remains committed to a nonviolent, peaceful approach to a two-state solution, and he remains committed to a two-state solution. Now, that has to be put to the test at some point in time, and I understand the difficulties Israel has had with them and him and so forth, having taken part in those negotiations for a long period of time. We objected. We do not believe Palestinians have the right to accede to the ICC because we do not believe they are a state in standing to be able to go to the ICC, and we made that argument. We made it to the, as did other countries, by the way. A number of other countries made that argument, but we lost. And we also forcefully advocated to the Palestinian leadership, don't do this. It's a mistake. You're going to breach, you're going to create all kinds of hurdles to the possibilities of the future. This is a mistake, but they're out of patience. And we couldn't contain that, and as you know, they went to the UN. And I spent 3 weeks over Christmas holiday working to keep people that we would like to be working with constructively from doing something negative. And in the end, by a vote, they didn't get the 9 votes at the UN, and so we never had to exercise a veto. But there's a great deal of frustration building, and this is not the moment to go into it in any depths. You know, we're very anxious not to get dragged into the election process. We're not going to. Israel has this important election coming up, and they need to do it without us kibitzing from the sidelines, so I'm not going to go further on this. I just say to you that we wish the Palestinians had behaved differently. And that's why they're not getting aid right now. And therefore, maybe some other people, we think others are going to step up and try to help bridge the gap in order to get them over the hurdle. But when the Israeli elections are over, there's going to be a need to quickly begin to try to decide where everybody's going thereafter, so that there is not an irretrievable clash that takes place with respect to the ICC or otherwise and prevents any further activity. On the first part of your question, just a very important part of the question, the Golan Heights, and you sort of talked about the budget as a whole and where we need to go. The need for the United States to step, I mean, I went through that list of things in the beginning: Ebola, ISIL, Afghanistan, the Maghreb, the Sahel, Somalia, Mali, Boko Haram, Yemen, Houthis, the region, still Al-Qaeda in the western part of Pakistan. I mean, you can run through the gamut of these challenges, and you got to recognize that it is the United States who usually helps to convene or becomes a central part of the convening, working with our key allies, Britain, France, Germany, other members of the P5. But we need to be able to make a difference to some of these countries. There's a different world we're living in now. After World War II, most of the world's economies were destroyed, and we were in great debt. But we came out of the recession by virtue of the war machine that was built up. And for 50 years or so, there was a pretty polarized East-West, sort of bipolar decision-making process. And it was a lot easier. Ever since the Berlin Wall fell and nations sprung up reclaiming their individuality and their personal aspirations and defining themselves differently and free and democratic, the economies of the world have changed. And now you have the BRICS, you have China, India, Brazil, Mexico, others, South Korea, people, all playing a different role, a different impact. And many of them are donor countries. So others are playing a more mercantilistic, voracious game in the marketplace of ideas and products than we are. And we have been hamstrung by this budgeting process here in Washington that is not allowing us to actually meet our own priorities and serve our own interests. And I can make a much longer, and I won't do it now, argument of how it specifically affects us in instance after instance. I'll give you just one example. Recently, the Prime Minister of a great country was here. I'm not going to go into the details of who. The most we were able to do was provide a loan guarantee when what they really needed were billions of dollars to help them move forward and make a difference. And if they get them from other places will actually wind up having greater impact and influence than we do.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I know it's been a long day of testimony. Some of us are getting our second shot at you today, those of us who are on the Appropriations Committee.
More than any senator should go through.
We had the chance to have a good dialogue this morning about my belief that we need to be having a more holistic conversation about the ways in which your lack of capacity to fight corruption, build up rule of law in and around the Russian sphere of influence is preventing us from doing the real work to combat their march across their periphery, and I hope that our committee will focus on that. But this may be the only chance that we get to talk to you before we have a fulsome debate about the authorization of military force that's pending before Congress. And so I wanted to just ask you a question or two to try to help us understand some of the terminology in the proposed draft that I think we're having trouble getting our hands wrapped around. You know, Secretary Gates, I believe shortly after he left the Department of Defense, said that if any future Secretary of Defense advised a president to deploy major numbers of combat troops back to the Middle East, that they should have their head examined. And there's a number of reasons for that. The lessons that we learned from the Iraq War are that when hundreds of thousands of American troops are there, we let the allies in the region off the hook, that we kill a lot of bad guys, but we frankly allow for our enemies to recruit more than we kill into the fight because of the presence of American troops. And it's why many of us really believe in this prohibition or restriction within this AUMF on another major deployment of ground troops to the Middle East. And I know you agree, and I know the President agrees, and I think our new Secretary of the Defense agrees. It's why the authorization draft that you gave us has that restriction in it. But I think we're struggling to understand these two words in it, enduring and offensive, and trying to get a better understanding of when the next president, because I don't think this president will make the mistake of deploying new ground troops to the Middle East, crosses that line. So can you give us a little bit more color on what your understanding of those two words mean? What's the number of ground troops that trips the enduring limitation? What are the kind of actions that would trip the defensive versus offensive juxtaposition? I know that you're not the Secretary of Defense, but you're intimately involved in these discussions and the ramifications. Would we ever commit troops to the region? Help us just understand a little bit more about what those words mean and if they are true limitations, because as you know, many of us believe that those words are so malleable to actually be no limitations at all, and I trust that you believe something different.
I'm not going to suggest to you that there isn't, in any terminology, latitude for interpretation, because there always is, unless there's an absolute horrendously prescriptive, broad prohibition, which everybody would counsel against, I think. I mean, we're seeking to destroy this entity, and it is not a good message nor a good policy to place such constraints on yourself that you can't do that. At the same time, the President wants to make certain that those who feel burned by prior votes or by prior experiences are not fearful that he is somehow opening up Pandora's box to that possibility again. So our feeling is, and we give kudos to you on this committee. I mean, I think Senator Menendez, as chair, is the one who produced this concept from your deliberations, and I would have hoped you would have said, God, they listened to us. I mean, we came up here, I testified in December, and we did listen to you. And I think the President tried to come back to you with something that he felt didn't constrain his ability to exercise his constitutional authority as President, but at the same time respected Congress's role and right to shape this. And that's what you've done and what you're doing. Now, enduring in our mind means no long-term offensive combat of a large scale, which is what the President has defined. In other words, we're not asking you for authorization to give us the ability to build up to a new Iraq or a new Afghanistan. It's not what we're doing. What we're asking for, and offense versus defense, I mean, when a large number, a battalion or whatever of forces are directed to go have a firefight with ISIL in a proactive way, that's offense. And that's prohibited, and that's not what we're seeking to do. But it doesn't mean that there might not be instances where you have advisors who are helping people to understand how to properly do fire control or properly call in air support or something else. There's special force operation that might be necessary for one thing or another to try to rescue somebody or close something. I mean, there are things that are not part of the larger offensive operation where you may well have reasons to have some people there. I would not consider that. They're, even though they may be in hostile area and on some occasion conceivably inadvertently take fire or something, they're not in proactive offensive actions, and certainly not enduring. I mean, what we don't want to do is get into a ground war. Gates, I think he said it was Gates who said that, and you know, President's trying to make sure that he doesn't have to have his head examined. This is a pretty straightforward prohibition without curtailing exigencies and leaving that sufficient level of fuzz that the other side can't decide, oh, we got a safe haven here. We can do whatever we want. Or they're not going to be able to, you know, whack us if we go do this or that or the other thing. So I think there has to be a little bit of leeway there. But rest assured, there is, in our judgment, no way possible for this language to be misinterpreted and allow a kind of mission creep that takes us into a long-term war.
And speaking for myself, I don't have any doubt that you will live within the confines that you and the President believe to have limited yourself publicly and within your interpretation of these words. I think that we are just going to be debating the amount of fuzz that's created here. And if there is so much so that the next president, who may not believe in the same strategic limitations that this president believes in, has an interpretation that is much more expansive than yours is, I think that's why we want to entertain further discussion.
And let me just say, Senator, that, you know, the President has, I mean, there have been authorizations previously which have had restraints in them, some more limiting than this. Obviously, there's a constitutional argument, which is powerful and important, to the effect that there shouldn't be any. And the President ought to set limits, and you can deal with the funding. You cut off the funding, you're managing what's going on. And you have the power of the purse. But it seems to me that what's important here also is for the world to see that the United States Congress is uniting in a significant vote to make it clear we're committed to degrade and destroy ISIL. That's critical. And so whatever you do, I think everybody's going to have to compromise a little bit. And I went through all your various positions, and there are little nuances of differences between almost everybody. And so it does require people kind of finding the common ground and coming together here. And we hope we can get the strongest vote possible that indicates the United States of America is committed to this policy.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being here today, your service to our country as Secretary of State as well as in this body. I just wanted to follow up quickly on my colleague's question. You mentioned that there had been other AUMF authorizations with restraints. Which ones were you referring to, and what were those restraints?
There was a, on the chemical weapons recently passed authorization, there were restraints put into that.
What were those restraints?
Let me check. There was a restraint of time limit of months and a limitation on a certain use of force on the...
And what was the other example you said there? I think you said there may have been...
There was multinational force in Lebanon, 1983, where there was a time limit, there were limitations on the use of force, et cetera. So I think what the President has tried to do here is tailor something based on the AUMF hearing we had in December that reflected the sensitivities of the committee. And obviously, you guys have to tackle that now, and the administration is prepared to sit and work with you and work it through.
And I want to follow up on the questions that Senator Flake had asked. When you were talking about the formal role of Congress in approval of any agreement, I believe you said that there was this other looming entity out there, that you were afraid or concerned about a possible approval by this other looming entity. Well, to me, that other looming entity is Article 1, the United States Congress. So 2 questions. Do you believe there should be a formal approval roll by the United States Congress for the agreement? And 2, will you be coming back to the United States Congress and asking for us to lift sanctions against the regime?
No, I don't think there ought to be a formal approval process. I think there is a formal process of consulting and of input, and ultimately you have to vote to lift the sanctions.
Will you be making that request to us?
Not immediately in our current notion of what we would be doing. There would have to be some period, I would think, of compliance and other kinds of things, and this is yet to be determined.
And the reports, I believe I came in from a Commerce Committee hearing right as you were telling her, Senator Menendez, that you can't read everything, you can't believe everything that you read. So the reports in the AP and other places that have said this would be a 10-year agreement with a 5-year ramp down, that's simply not true?
I already said that is not our view of it, but we haven't reached an agreement yet, so.
Is that one of the considerations that you're making, a 10-year time frame with the 5 years out?
I don't want to get into what we are or aren't. I'm just telling you that's not where it's at today.
Have you had conversations perhaps with Speaker Boehner, Majority Leader McConnell about the terms of the agreement?
I have not had direct conversations.
Do you think that's appropriate to speak to the
Well,
leadership
we're
of
consulting,
Congress?
well, what we're doing, Senator, is we're having very regular consultations. Wendy Sherman and the team have been up here in classified session with many of you. That has been going on for almost 2 years now. We've been consulting on a regular basis in classified forum. I've personally telephoned the chairs and ranking members at the conclusion of negotiations, given them some indication of what we're doing, where we are. So there's a regular consultation taking place under the normal order of the U.S. Senate. And when the briefings take place down in the classified room, if the practice is continued when I was here, the leaders are usually there and part of those briefings.
Do you believe that that consultation is what will fulfill the role that Congress plays in this agreement?
I do. I think that
Just the hearings downstairs in the basement, that's basically our role?
in terms of the ongoing negotiating portion, yes. You certainly have a right to have whatever hearings and whatever further examinations you want to have if a deal is struck, or, I mean, that's your prerogative at any point in time, and ours is to respond to you and to you know.
But no other role in feedback on this than straight congressional hearings?
No, I believe this falls squarely within the executive power of the President of the United States in the execution of American foreign policy, and he is executing thoroughly all his responsibilities of consultation. But in the end, this is the President's prerogative. You can always decide to oppose it one way or the other, as you might. Our hope is that we will consult, work together, not set up predetermined barriers that make it difficult to get to an agreement. I mean, every nuance of what we do here, folks, I'm telling you, gets interpreted, and usually in ways that make our negotiating life harder. I'm really
Will you
serious.
commit to us that you will not be asking us to lift sanctions?
Beg your pardon?
Is there any commitment that you can make that would involve you, a commitment that you would not be asking Congress to lift sanctions?
I don't want to bind that at this moment. I know of nothing at this moment in time, but I'm not going to bind myself. I don't know how this proceeds. I don't know where we wind up, and I'm not going to take away, depending on what we got for it, some option. But that's not our current.
I'm running out of time here. I want to switch to the Asia rebalance. One of the signature policies or initiatives of the administration was the pivot of the rebalance in Asia. Announced November 2011 in Australia, the President said that our new focus on this region reflects a fundamental truth. The United States has been and always will be a Pacific nation. And I agree, and I'm serving as the new chairman of the East Asia and Pacific Subcommittee. Look forward to working with you, my colleague, Senator Cardin from Maryland, to ensure that our policies reflect the growing strategic importance of this region, covering nearly 2/3 of the Earth's population. But I'm concerned that the administration's efforts to apply this whole-of-government approach to the Asia-Pacific region are faltering. Last year, this committee issued a report that highlighted some of these shortcomings, noting that the administration, and this is the quote from the report, the administration can improve the effectiveness and sustainability of the rebalance policy by increasing civilian engagement, strengthening diplomatic partnerships, and empowering U.S. businesses. I understand that the fiscal year 2016 request for diplomatic engagement within the East Asian and Pacific Affairs Bureau is up 6% this year, but is still 11% below 2014 fiscal year levels. How do you explain the disparity in the administration's rhetoric and the seeming discrepancy in the budget request?
I'm not sure I followed you completely on what is up?
So basically, the East Asian and Pacific Affairs Bureau is up 6%, but that's still 11% below what the fiscal year 2014 funding levels were. So despite the efforts of the Asian pivot, or the talk of the rhetoric of an Asian pivot, are we actually reaching that, and is that remain a priority, a top priority for the administration?
Senator, I'm not sure what figure you're balancing against what to come up with that, because the 2016 budget has a $1.4 billion increase, not total, in support of the rebalance, and that includes a 6% increase over 2014. And we are pursuing the Trans-Pacific Partnership voraciously. We have a major effort going with respect to the region. We just had Undersecretary Wendy Sherman was over there about a month ago. Deputy Secretary Tony Blinken was over there 2 weeks ago following that visit. I'm going over in about a month to follow up on that visit. We have President Xi coming here for a visit in the fall. We have major presence with our negotiations right now with Vietnam, Malaysia. I've been talking personally with the prime ministers and foreign ministers of these countries. So we're deeply, deeply engaged in this rebalance. We've never had that many high-level visits taking place. We've had a revamping of our defense policy with Japan, with South Korea. We're engaged. The president was over there for his 5th trip. I think I've made 7 since I've been secretary. So I think that every step the East Asia Pacific Bureau is taking, and every step the higher level of the State Department is taking and the administration is following up on this notion of the rebalance and of its importance.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I would say on the consultation, I hate to jump in here, but at every one of these meetings where the numbers of centrifuges are generally laid out and we express concern, the next report, the numbers of centrifuges increase. And I would say at every time we get concerned about the length of time of the agreement being too short, at every report, the length of the agreement shortens. So I do hope we'll have an opportunity to weigh in on the totality of the deal prior to sanctions being lifted. I don't think that's an undue burden when Congress put those in place in the first place. With that, Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. First of all, Mr. Secretary, I want to congratulate you on your naming of a special envoy for LGBT rights in the State Department. I think it's a historic moment, and I was just wondering what response you may have received over, the past few days from other countries in your announcement.
Well, to be honest with you, Senator, I've been wrapped up in the negotiations. I just got back late last night, so I have not had personally any response. I'm told very, very positive response. I read one article in the paper this morning which was very positive about it, but I haven't seen overall.
Great. Anyway, I think it's an important step forward. Al-Shabaab has threatened the Mall of America. And that's clearly, linking foreign policy to domestic homeland security. The president's constantly about countering violent extremism. And so I'm just wondering if you could give us a little bit of an insight into what actions your department, the Obama administration generally, is taking to counter this threat coming out of Somalia in terms of its potential threat to the homeland?
Well, Senator, we're engaged in the most massive day-to-day counterterrorism efforts that one could imagine, and it is consuming every aspect of government. The President regularly convenes a national security meeting to get updates on where we are and what we are doing, and particularly when we're in the moment of a particular threat or challenge. I think what the Department of Homeland Security was really talking about is sort of a generic set of threats and challenges that are out there that we're working to respond to. We have an unprecedented level of communication and information sharing, intelligence sharing taking place now with other countries. We have the Counterterrorism Partnership Fund, which we're requesting money from all of you to implement, and that's $390 million, which will be used to enhance border security among our foreign partners. We're working with the Europeans to move them now to sharing lists on passengers, which they hadn't been doing. We're trying to increase the scrutiny of people moving in between countries and share more information about it. We're trying to stem the financial flow to these groups through nations and increase scrutiny of who's giving money, how, and how it flows. There's a Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications, which has been set up, and that is playing, at the State Department, is playing a key role in our efforts to counter violent extremism, and it's coordinating and informing a whole of government public communication structure that is able to pass on information and counter rumors and deal with social media in Arabic, in Urdu, in Somali, and more recently, English, because of English-speaking countries which are at risk. So there's just a whole of government effort going on. It's taking shape. It's growing almost by the day and week. The counterterrorism, counter-extremism session that we just had in the last 2 or 3 days, the first day of it at the White House was almost exclusively civil society, law enforcement, NGOs, people who are engaged in grassroots efforts to see how they can be augmented to this. Now, one thing I don't want to have come out of this, this is a challenge, and it's a legitimate threat, and indeed, there are risks in certain places at certain times. But no one should doubt that notwithstanding that, we are actually living in the least loss of life, violent period in our history. There's an anomaly here. And so I think what people need to do is be vigilant, but not scared. People need to be always attentive, but never fearful of doing something or going somewhere. And I think travel today is safer than it's ever been. I think people's ability to move, our SWAT teams are better, our sharing of information, the FBI, all of our units, people have really gotten pretty good. Doesn't mean a lone wolf can't come along and do something. If somebody wants to die, you can hurt people.
May I ask one?
I think it's important for people to recognize this is not a moment of, turning inwards and getting frightened.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The U.S.-China climate agreement was historic, not universally well received. Could you tell the committee why this agreement serves America's interests? And what you believe it contributes towards reaching a positive result in Paris later on this year?
Well, look, you're absolutely correct. Of course it's not universally well received. On one side, you have people who don't receive it well because there are still people who don't think we have to do anything. On the other side, you have people who believe we ought to be doing more. I happen to be one of those, and I helped negotiate this deal. I would have loved to have seen it do more. But this is the most we could get. And we took a country, most people thought it was foolish, and how could you possibly try to get China? Up until last year, you know this better than anybody, China was on the opposite side of the table and stopping us from doing anything. And we turned that around in a year to have a China that has publicly committed to set a standard for reduction of dependency on fossil fuel by 2030 and begin to have a 20% commitment internally to alternative renewable energy, clean energy. That's huge. And in our case, we set a goal of somewhere between 26 and 28% reduction in our emissions by 2025, with the hope that we are going to actually do better and hit the 28 and do it sooner. China likewise committed to try to do it sooner if possible. Now, we believe the technology is going to help us do it sooner. If we get moving down that road, the technology curve always winds up producing faster and spinning out new ways of doing things cheaper, and you get to your goal faster. So that's our bet. But we're still behind the curve from where we need to be in terms of meeting our obligation to deal with climate change and keep the rise of temperature on planet Earth to 2 degrees centigrade. We're not going to make it right now. And that's why we're still talking, a lot of people are talking about mitigation and dealing with the effects. But I'll tell you this, I run into the effects of climate change in various parts of the world all the time now. There are tribes fighting each other over water in places that there used to be water and it isn't anymore. There are record-level droughts, 500-year droughts. By the way, in California, as Senator Boxer knows better than anybody, not just in deserts in other parts of the world. We've had record levels of storm damage, of fires, the hottest year. Each year now is the hottest year since the last year for the last 10, 12, whatever number of years. You know this better than anybody in the Senate, Senator Markey. So we're behind the curve, but what we're trying to do is create a critical mass of countries out of the major emitting nations that will then have an impact on everybody gathering in Paris. And when they see that the major countries are doing it, and the reason others have to do it is less developed countries now equal over 50% of all emissions. So they have to start coming on board because no one country can reduce completely. If everybody rode a bicycle tomorrow and nobody drove to work and in public transportation and we didn't have emissions, we would still be in deep, deep trouble because of the rate of the promulgation of coal-fired power plants in various countries around the world. So we have a huge distance to travel, and the great benefit, you asked about the benefit, the market we're looking at for clean, renewable, efficient energy is a $6 trillion market with 4 to 5 billion users. And that will rise to 9 billion users as the population grows up to 2050 or so. The market that created the great wealth of our nation when every quintile saw their income go up in the 1990s was a $1 trillion market with 1 billion users. So that's what we got, 6 trillion versus 1 billion users versus 4 to 5 now and more growing. This is the biggest market in all of human history. Countless people can be put to work, countless technologies put in place, new grids, smart energy, all of these things. And the sooner we move to it, the sooner a lot of economies start to move, and the sooner we deal with the crisis.
Thank you. Senator Boxer.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for this. Thank you, Secretary Kerry. You are serving in very challenging times, and you're doing it so well. You're making us proud, whether we agree with you or disagree with you. And I think a lot of us agree with you sometimes and disagree with you sometimes. And I have to say, you're a great diplomat, and those skills were on display today. And so I'm very pleased to see you. You know, in light of the threats that you've laid out, I'm not going to ask you about 4 days looming shutdown of Homeland Security, because that's not your bailiwick, that's Secretary Johnson's, but I think it ought to be another message to everybody. That's a ridiculous way to run a country at this difficult time. I also want to say I agree with your overarching comments at the beginning that, you know, there's not enough of a priority placed on the work of the State Department and the very brave men and women out there representing our great nation and how important it is. And that's why I so strongly supported what the president did on Cuba, because I find that when people meet Americans, they fall in love with America. And that's the way we're going to influence people, to have contact. I know there's a lot of issues that divide us on this, even within our own party and on the other side, which is okay, is fine. But from my perspective, when I went there years ago, what I recognize is the Cubans were so afraid to be seen with us. They ran away, ordinary folks that had to be all straightened out with the top people there because they were afraid that they would get harassed by even talking to us. So I just want you to know that I back what you did there. On Iran, this is a chance of a lifetime to do something so important. And I know how difficult it is. And I know you've said, and so is Wendy Sherman in many of our meetings, that this is a difficult thing, and it may not work. Maybe it's 50-50. I don't know today if you'd still say it's 50-50. But I think trying to get a deal here is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. And we've done it with other countries. And the most important thing to me, and I spoke with Senator Risch about this once, is the verifiability. We cannot trust these people for 1 second, that government. We can trust the people, but the government we can't. And so it must be verifiable. And for me, that's what I'm looking for, the inspections, the unfettered ability to see if this is real. And also, I would demand that there be constant reports to the Congress as to whether they're living within the agreement. Now, I am working on something. I just want to know if you could make time for me in your busy life that takes us somewhere between where some want to go, where I think Congress gets over-involved, and where some others want to go, where they want Congress to be under-involved. I think there is a sweet spot here that does deal with our getting involved in the sanctions we put in place, and also on demanding reporting requirements. And I hope, would you make time for me, or your staff make time for me, so I can go over some legislation I've been working on with Senator Paul? Okay.
And by the way, Senator, thank you for flying back, especially to do the hearing on Cuba with Senator Rubio. We really appreciate it.
Listen, I was very happy to be part of that. Let me just close with this argument, and it gets to the AUMF. You and I are very close friends and allies most of the time. The one time we had a real difference was on the war in Iraq, and you remember that. And it had to do with wording, and it had to do with approaches to an issue. And you were working on wording with Senator Biden and Senator Lugar, and it was a difficult meeting, and we did not reach agreement on wording on the Iraq War. I asked the CRS if they could analyze this word enduring, and I want to say I asked my ranking member here, when he put forward the idea of enduring, he had a list of what it meant. The way you have approached this, Mr. Secretary, I'm telling you, you don't have any definition. And the CRS, and I ask unanimous consent to put this in the record if I can, Mr. Chairman, put this in the record. Okay.
Without objection.
Here's what they say. This is incredibly important for you to hear. Quote, it seems doubtful that a limitation on, quote, enduring offensive ground combat operations, unquote, would present sufficient judicially manageable standards by which a court could resolve any conflict that might arise between Congress and the executive branch over the interpretation of the phrase or its application to U.S. involvement in hostilities. This is the CRS. They don't have a dog in the fight. And this is really very important, because I'm not going to support this. It is as open-ended as you can imagine. It's ridiculous. No one can define what it means. You said, oh, it's extended hostility. CRS says it can't be. I say it can't be. Just common sense-wise, it can't be. Because what's an enduring relationship to one person is not an enduring relationship to another. Enduring is a subjective term, and it is not tested. So I am saying to you, as someone who agrees with you and the president, when you and he have said in the most beautiful, unequivocal terms, and I quote the president from June 19, 2014, American combat troops are not going to be fighting again in Iraq. These American forces will not have a combat mission. We will not get dragged into another ground war in Iraq, nor do we intend to send U.S. troops to occupy foreign lands. 2015, instead of getting dragged into another ground war, we are leading a broad coalition. And, Mr. Secretary, you said the same thing. It's a red line for everybody here. There are no boots on the ground. You said that September 2014, and then you said, the president has said repeatedly, U.S. ground troops will not engage in combat roles. And you said in December 2014, the president has been crystal clear that his policy is that U.S. military forces will not be deployed to conduct ground combat operations against ISIL. That will be the responsibility of local forces. So this is your clear statement of policy. Today you affirmed that that is the current policy. I'd ask to put these statements in the record.
Without objection.
And yet you send up here an AUMF with this giant loophole you could drive, a combat truck through, and it is not going to get a lot of support among, I think, the Democrats on this committee. I don't speak for every one of them, but we've had many discussions. I am hopeful that you can take back to the president some of the comments. Now, on the other side of the aisle, you're facing a whole other problem. I think, I cannot speak for them. They want very few limitations. And I know this puts you in a bind. But the most important thing to me, when you send up an AUMF, is to have it reflect your own strategy. And I don't think this reflects your strategy. I think it reflects an attempt to bring people together to get something. But at the end of the day, I don't know what a future president is going to do. I know what this president is going to do, and I support that strategy strongly. I voted for an AUMF that was put together by our then chairman. Every Democrat supported it, from, if I could say, center to center left to far left, supported it. And then you come in with this one. I'm just saying, I hope you will take back to the president the fact that the CRS says it can't be, it's not a term that's definable, and that many of us feel it's an open-ended commitment. Will you take that back to him and tell him some of us feel that way?
I think he's well aware of that position among some people here, Senator, and you're articulate and clear about it, as always. But I would just say to you that I think the policy that the president has defined and all of the statements that you just articulated are contained within the language that Senator Menendez and the committee produced previously. We believe that. Now, I think that when you get into this process, and I'm consistent with what I said here in December, of trying to list things, it gets difficult because of something that gets left out or something that was meant, it just gets more complicated. But that's why there's a sunset.
My time is running out. My time's running out.
Just finish.
Nothing gets more complicated than the use of a word that no one can define. It's a disaster. The president isn't going to be here after a year
Well, let's
and a
work
half or
at
two.
well, the president will be here for another year and 3/4.
I don't think, and this
And-
would go for 3 years.
Well,
So
I
you're not
agree,
talking
but-
about just this president.
Right. But I think that the language is such, and the process is such with the sunset, that the sunset can be executed in a way that you protect minority rights, so that there has to be a coming together and a conclusion on it with respect to how that vote takes place, so that the future president really can't abuse it, per se. They're going to have to deal with it. And I think, in my judgment, that is a strong protection, because if you can't get it renewed because there's not a willing majority to be able to do that, you effectively asserted your rights and your position.
Well, we just disagree. Thank you, though.
Thank you. Senator Udall.
Thank you.
But let me just finish one other thought. As we've said to you, this is an open process. I mean, this is now in the legislative arena. I think the goal is to get as many votes as you can, Senator Boxer. I think if you think you can bring, 45, 50 Republicans on board with language that is absolutely prohibitory, then, or more declarative, as long as it isn't restrictive of things the president thinks he needs to guard, that's the give and take here. I doubt you can get there, but if you can, more power to you. Well, Senator, I don't know where.
If we could, I think I've had a chance to discuss it fully, and I appreciate the views of both of you, and I think Senator Udall would like to weigh in.
Thank you, Chairman Corker, and thank you, Senator Menendez. And not to beat a dead horse here, but I just, on this specific subject that Senator Boxer brought up, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you coming in December and outlining what it is that you felt the administration needed. And as you saw with Senator Menendez at the chair, we did some very serious work, and we came up with a lot what was very close to what you talked about. I think we really, on my part, I wanted to be more limiting, but I voted for the final product, and as Senator Chairman Corker, I don't know what the dynamic, because we were in the majority at the time, but I think we all worked seriously, and there were Republicans that wanted to be more limiting, and so I think there's a lot of room to take that product and move forward and work with it.
That's what we're looking for, Senator. This is not a closed out, this is not a take it or leave it, obviously. So we look forward to your work on it, and ask you simply to work with us also to make sure that we're not put in a place that's doesn't allow us to pursue the policy per se.
Speaking, you've spoken several times about Cuba and what's happened in Cuba, and I just want to applaud the administration for normalizing relations. And Senator Flake and I were down there together just before, within about 6 weeks of when Alan Gross was released, and then when the big announcements were made. And what I'm wondering is, what do you think is, we know that there are serious problems with this authoritarian government and all the things that they do, but what is your recommendation of the best steps forward to normalize and how we move down a path? There are all sorts of things are being explored, but what is your...
Well, the normalization process is effectively announced and now needs to be implemented. And that should not be, the theory of the normalization is that it is getting it in place that in fact begins to put us in a different position to be able to advance our interests. I mean, Senator Menendez and others are absolutely correct about what the problems are there. We all agree. There's maybe a slight difference about how you're going to get them to change. Our theory of the case is that the best change is going to come through families, through people, through travel, through information, through access, and that normalization, in fact, leverages our ability to do what 50 years of isolation has not achieved. Now, obviously, the proof will be in the pudding. But we've seen what hasn't happened for this long period of time. So effectively, we think we ought to try this difference. Now, we will have a meeting this Friday here in Washington that will take place, which will basically be negotiating the normal pieces of negotiating the entry into normal diplomatic relations. In other words, how do your diplomats react? What are their rights of movement? How do they, the visa situations, the travel, the access to equipment, goods, all those kinds of things have to be negotiated. And the components of the agreement, which we understood were critical, like the internet and the business and so forth, has to be articulated. That's being done now, at which point we hopefully are in a position to actually sign memorandums of exchange diplomatic notes and engage in the process.
Yeah. Shifting over to Iran, you talked earlier about the execution of American foreign policy, and I can't think of a more dramatic area of the collision between the executive branch and the legislative branch than when a foreign leader, and the Constitution talks about who deals with foreign leaders, than what's happened here with this speech on March 4th by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I've said publicly that I believe that he should postpone that speech. To me, could you describe people what is at issue here? You're the Secretary of State. You understand this issue. Do you think this is a wise move on the part of the Prime Minister to come here when we're in the middle of these very delicate negotiations? Was it a wise move on his part to ignore the administration in terms of appearing in front of a joint session of Congress? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that you, as senators, have all the leeway in the world to make up your own minds about how you feel about this decision. My job is to work with the Prime Minister of Israel and with Israel to maintain its security, to honor our very, very strong relationship. I speak with the Prime Minister more than any other leader. I speak with him regularly, and it is an important part of our security and his security, I mean the security of Israel, and the enduring relationship that we have, and nobody should question that relationship. You all have to make up your own minds about the propriety of the way this unfolded or what happened. We're going to proceed about our business, which is protecting the country and maintaining the integrity of these relationships, and that includes Israel. I will be, I've been focused on, obviously, Iran negotiations and Ukraine and Afghanistan, a bunch of other things, and actually I will be leaving, I think, on Saturday for meetings with Foreign Minister Lavrov on Syria and other things, then Human Rights Council. I will not be here. I will be negotiating with Iran for the rest of that week, as a matter of fact. So during that period of time, I will actually be sitting there trying to get an agreement.
So, Secretary Kerry, just to conclude, I mean, I tried to have my staff research this, so I don't know of any other time that has been, that the administration has been ignored. Can you, in your memory at all, and if you can't answer that now, I hope you'll try to answer that for me in terms of the history of our foreign relations, where
I think that your staff should do some research for you, and I'm not going to get into the history here now, one way or the other. As I said to you, my focus is on protecting the relationship between us and Israel and dealing with important issues in the region, and I don't want anything coming in between that.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I believe it's a tremendously important relationship, but I also believe what the Prime Minister has done by taking this action. He's created a very divisive situation. Thank you, Secretary Kerry, for all your hard work. Yield back.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have a lot of questions about the ISIL AUMF, but I'm going to hold on those for the hearing that we will have on that, hearings that we will have on it. I'll talk to you about strategy, and I want to talk to you about security. On the strategy side, having been on this committee for about 2 years, and just even as a citizen reading the news, it seems like we're always in crisis management mode because there's always crises. But just because there are always, have always, and will always be crises, that doesn't mean we need to define our job as crisis managers. And I think we ought to look big picture strategy and take advantage of some successes. And I'm going to commend you both in both senses. Thank you, but also encourage you on one. I just got back from a CODEL to Mexico, Honduras, and Colombia. Mexico is now our #3 trade partner. net migration from Mexico is now zero. As many Americans migrate to Mexico as Mexicans migrate to the United States, which is a very dramatic thing. Even with significant security challenges, and we're working with Mexico on those, the increase in the Mexican middle class has been sizable, and the trade relationship between the United States and Mexico has gone a long way in 20 years. Honduras, very challenging situation. The administration has put on the table a significant planned Central America investment that's based on a plan the Northern Triangle nations put together. And this kind of investment, if we do it the right way, has the capacity to be a significant improvement in life for folks in that region and also slow the unaccompanied minor migration to this country. And then I went to Colombia, and I was there on the day that you announced Bernie Aronson as the United States special envoy to the peace talks between the Colombian government to accompany our ally Colombia in the negotiations with the FARC to end a 50-year civil war in Colombia. Colombia was a failed state in the late 1990s, but because of the U.S. investments, and they will say because of the U.S. investments and their own hard work, they have now become, next to Canada, our primary security partner in the hemisphere. They provide security on the border between Egypt and Israel. They provide security assistance to Central American nations, and their economy has grown in a significant way. People who've done your job as Secretary of State, you spend all your time traveling east and west, all your time. I'm exaggerating a little bit. American foreign policy is about Europe, then it was about the Soviet Union, then it's about the Middle East. Now we're pivoting to Asia. It's as if the world has an east-west axis only when we know it's got a north-south axis. And what the Latin countries have told me on this visit and others when I live there is that you pay attention to us when there's a crisis, but you ought to pay more attention to us because there's a lot of good things going on. I think from a big picture strategic standpoint, I would commend you for the work that you've done with respect to Cuba, with respect to the planned Central America, with respect to Colombia, but I would also encourage you to really focus on that north-south axis. We're 35 countries, we're 1 billion people. We share a name, we're all Americans, North Americans, Central Americans, South Americans. We have a unique culture that was formed by indigenous and European and African, and we share that from the Yukon to Patagonia, and that unique culture has made us who we are, but it's also made us open to other cultures as the immigration to the Americas from Asia has shown. Trade is booming in this region between our nations. The prosperity of the continents has dramatically improved. It's not just Canada and the U.S. and the 33 dwarfs anymore. It's significant major economies that are doing some wonderful things. There are challenges, sure, but if this civil war in Colombia ends, we will be 2 continents of peace. There will not be a war in North or South America. You can't say that about Europe with what's going on in Ukraine. You can't say that about Africa. You can't say that about Asia. But we are close to being able to say it about the Americas. So I just want to commend you for the work that you've already done, but let's just not focus on the Americas, when there's a crisis, and then turn our attention back to the east-west axis. This 1 billion people, 35 countries, 2 continents that could potentially be continents of peace, could be some of the best inoculation that we would have against global security challenges if we are persistent, if we stick with it, and I would encourage you to do that. Last thing I'll say, I want to thank you on something else. First time we had a hearing together after your confirmation, and I was sitting as the newest guy on the committee, I asked you about the ARB recommendation with respect to embassy security. Yes. The State Department had a multi-year search and had decided that they needed to do an embassy security facility to keep our people safe. And they had come up with that conclusion and picked a site in Virginia in the summer of 2012. A few months after the choice of the site, we had the horrible attack at Benghazi, and in the aftermath, the ARB report suggested that this site was needed. And yet here we are now nearly 3 years after the selection of the site, 2.5 years after the horrible tragedy at Benghazi, and it hasn't really moved forward. But I was happy to see in the President's FY16 budget a proposal to finally invest $99 million to build this embassy security facility. You mentioned that there were ARB recommendations that have been done, and there are ARB recommendations that hadn't been done. One of the ones that hasn't been done was to provide state-of-the-art security training for those who serve in dangerous embassies around the world. And given that the State Department wisely recommended in the summer of 2012 that we needed to make this investment, I'm a little chagrined, but still excited to see that in FY16, we might finally start to act on that awareness within the State Department. And I don't know if you have comments either about the strategy or the security point. Thank you.
I have comments about both, Senator. Let me just tell you that on the latter, we're very, very excited about this. The Department of State and the General Services Administration looked at over 70 properties. There was a major property, obviously, down in Georgia that was considered. It's the Enforcement Training Center, the federal law enforcement training center. And there was a lot of talk about going there, but we made the right decision to go to Fort Pickett. Over a 10-year period, we will literally save, the cost would have been $91 million to do it in Georgia. It's $9 million to do it in the cost of transportation back and forth to do it in Virginia. So this is a good decision. It's going to get implemented now. We're ready to go. And we're very excited about it. All the due diligence has been done. It's going to happen. On the policy, I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, I think it was about a month ago. When did we do Canada up in Boston? January, early January. I invited the Foreign Minister of Mexico and the Foreign Minister of Canada to come and join me in Boston for a day and a half, 2 days. And we had dinner at my house, and then we had a full day of meetings, took them to a hockey game, and had a lot of fun. And we talked about North America. We talked about the ability of Canada, U.S., Mexico, which are a huge part of the global economy, by the way, when you combine them, to be able to have much greater impact and have a greater impact, by the way, on Central America and Latin America. So we've committed to that. And in fact, I've had a meeting in the State Department within the last month at which we sat with our Western Hemisphere Assistant Secretary, Roberta Jacobson, who's doing a great job, and others, and talked about how we are going to implement a greater north-south complement over the course of the next 2 years of this administration. And the appointment of the special envoy to Colombia came out of my second visit to Colombia and my discussions with President Santos, who asked us to get engaged and to become involved. And President Obama agreed to do that, and together we decided that, Bernie is the fellow to help get the job done because he was intimately involved in the Nicaragua, El Salvador peace process and has great experience, served previously as an assistant secretary for Western Hemisphere. In fact, I worked with him on the committee when I was chairman of that subcommittee. So we think we got something cooking, and that together with the Central America Initiative and efforts to deal with PetroCaribe, with the fuel problems that the Caribbean may have depending on what happens with fuel prices in Venezuela and so forth, we're now putting together an entire energy connection strategy, which involves Mexico and others, which could begin to really change the economies of the region. So I think I appreciate your focus. We should work on it. Next time we head down there, maybe you want to come with me. And I will be heading down there shortly. We're very excited about the possibility of really defining this North America access, and you're right on target.
Thank you. Senator Menendez.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, and I want to thank Senator King because as someone who for 23 years has been trying to create this focus on Latin America and the Caribbean, it's great to have another voice who's equally as passionate about it. Mr. Secretary, 3 quick questions. One, speaking about Latin America, the situation in Venezuela continues to deteriorate. The Venezuelan government arrested Caracas Mayor Antonio Ledesma on trumped-up charges. There are high-profile political prisoners in Venezuela like Leopoldo Lopez, who have languished in prison for over a year. We had legislation passed, signed by the President, that calls for including mandatory implementations of certain sanctions. Can you give us an update of where the administration is at and how they intend to move forward?
Yeah, we're perplexed by and disturbed by what's going on in Venezuela, Senator. I reached out to the foreign minister when I traveled last year a year before to Panama, and I think it was in Guatemala I saw him. And we met. It was supposed to be a 15-minute meeting, turned out to be 45. We agreed we were going to try to follow on and begin a new period, and the next thing I knew, a couple weeks later, we were being attacked for this or that and accused of this and that. This seems to be the pattern. Whenever President Maduro or someone in Venezuela at the high level of their government gets into trouble or something's pressing politically, they blame America. And it is a repeated effort to trump up notions of coups which don't exist and to play to, frankly, a very old script. I mean, this is, regrettable. So our policy is we're very supportive of, we're trying, we continue to meet with and we encourage meaningful dialogue between all the sectors of Venezuelan society, political opposition, society, business, government, et cetera. We call on the government to release political prisoners, including dozens of students, and opposition leaders, Leopoldo Lopez and Mayor Daniel Caballos and Enzo Scarano. And we're working with others to try to get them to live up to their defense of democracy. So we're working with the National Security Council right now and the Department of Treasury and other agencies to implement the provisions of the law on sanctions, and we're moving ahead as fast as we can.
Well, I
And I
hope,
have raised the issue of Venezuela in all my conversations with leaders in the surrounding.
when we were proposing this, we were asked to withhold because there was an attempt by Colombia and others to try to engage, and unfortunately that didn't produce a result. And it seems that President Maduro only continues to arrest those that either create opposition to his government and or who he uses as scapegoats. At some point, I just hope that we can use the provisions of the law sooner rather than later, and I would commend your attention to it.
Well, we're pushing to implement.
Great. Secondly, Turkey has gone into the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus, put its ships there, followed with warships. It's pretty outrageous. And is a country who is part of Cyprus, part of the European Union. If this is the way we're going to have countries in that region affect others' economic exclusive zones, which are internationally recognized, and at the same time pressure a country who's in the midst in good faith of negotiation to try to solve their longstanding problem in terms of the division of the country, it's a horrible set of circumstances. I hope we can be stronger with the Turkish government about that. This just simply, I've read some statements and they've been positive in terms of, criticizing what they've done, but they're still there. And at some point, there has to be, there's another one of those elements of violating international norms and not having any real consequence, and the message you send globally is you can do that if you happen to be the stronger party.
And we've raised this issue. I've raised this issue. I met with the President of Cyprus, with Prime Minister, and we've had various conversations. It has been raised with, Turkey. I don't know when, but in the not too distant future, I think I am slated to head in that direction, and this would be one of the conversations, is how do we move on Cyprus in a more effective, different.
Well, I hope we can be vigorous about the part that if you want to get a negotiation forward, you can't have your warships off the coast of the country. And that's just not a way in which to get parties. And I must say that I have followed this issue as well for a long time. This Cypriot government is more advanced, more forward-leaning in trying to get to a negotiated settlement, but you can't do it at the point of a gun, in essence, and it creates a real problem to try to move forward. So I hope when you're in the region, or
we've been
assistant
doing it
secretary could be.
We've been doing it even outside the region. I
Okay.
had meetings in Munich on it. We had meetings prior to that. I had meetings in New York on it. We've met frequently with all the players. We have people deeply engaged. We have an ambassador who's to the talks, who's deeply engaged in it. And it did get in a bad place, partly because of this, but other ingredients also. My hope is, I've had conversations with the Turkish foreign minister about it. Previously, now Prime Minister Davutoglu and I were working quite closely on it. My hope is we could get back to an equilibrium that would allow us to move forward, but we specifically discussed the economic zone, the ship presence, and the gas rights, and so forth.
One final comment. On Cuba, I noticed your comment about what didn't work for 50 years and how we can apply leverage. What also hasn't worked for 50 years is the leverage of the international community that was all engaged with Cuba, and all the Castro regime has had more political prisoners, more beatings, more repression, and no openings whatsoever. So the Europeans, the Latin Americans, the Canadians, and others who have traded with Cuba, visited Cuba, done all of those things that we think are going to be the turning point, did absolutely nothing to change the course of events there. I hope, and I understand that at the President's direction, you're conducting a review of Cuba on the state list of terrorist sponsors. So as Assistant Secretary Jacobson was before the committee at that hearing, she confirmed that the Castro regime continues to provide sanctuary to Joanne Chesimard, who is on the FBI's top 10 list of wanted terrorists. We also know that Basque terrorists from the ETA are there. We also know that even while negotiations are being hosted by Cuba with the FARC, that the FARC continues to conduct terrorist organizations even as they are in the midst of negotiations inside of Colombia, and the Colombian government pushes back on them. And we know that Cuba sent the most significant violation of UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea, sent MiGs, missiles, and tons of other military equipment to North Korea in violation of those sanctions. So when you're looking at removing Cuba from the list of terrorists, I'm going to look at that provision of the law that specifically comes from the Export Administration Act that defines the term, quote, repeatedly provided support for acts of international terrorism to include the recurring use of any part of the territory of the country as a sanctuary for terrorists or terrorist organizations. And I'll be looking forward to how you're going to meet that threshold to remove Cuba from the list.
That's all part of the analysis that has to be made.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here, and I want to raise just a couple of small issues relative to some of the bigger issues you've been talking about, but, and I'll do so briefly. I know we all have places to go, but I know hundreds of American families have adopted young ones in the DRC. They have suspended the process of those children leaving. I know it's an incredibly difficult thing for us to deal with the government that's in place there, but I would hope that, I want to raise this at this meeting just so that your department will continue to work with us and others to try to break that loose, and to also get some kind of lever in place to cause the DRC to act appropriately. And I know there's a note that's just been slid to you there. But the fact is that, you know, these are kids that are actually adopted today by U.S. families and yet unable to get them out. And I don't know if you want to respond to that or not.
Well, I've raised it personally with President Kabila, and Russ Feingold raised it with him. We have not had a result yet, but we're mindful of it.
Obviously, in comparison to some of the other issues we've discussed today, it's minor. It's everything, obviously, to the families who are involved, and I hope that you'll continue to raise that issue.
Well, we agree, and we raise these, let me tell you, with the Iranians, whether it's, you know, Saeed Abedini or Hekmati or Levinson or Jason Rezaian, I mean, these names are all in the front of my head because we constantly raise people who've been held in one place or another. We don't always talk about the names publicly because sometimes that works to disadvantage. But there are folks in Pakistan, places where we are highly focused on these situations, and it's a daily concern of the State Department.
We appreciate your commitment to the authorization process, and I think that in many ways it can help you significantly in what you're doing to leverage efforts and get Congress far more bought into some of the issues you're talking about today, and yet there's almost no knowledge of those activities because of the lack of involvement that's taken place. So I look forward to working with you on that.
Okay.
I appreciate very much your comments regarding the Modern Slavery Initiative, and Senator Menendez and I introduced legislation today that hopefully will move through the committee later this week and onto the Senate floor, and I know you're committed to the same. And I just want to close with this. I think there is a concern, and I know we're going to have a lot of testimony. I know there's a concern. We're going to have a lot of testimony over the next several weeks regarding Syria. There is a sense of a lack of commitment. You're not going to dispel that today, but I do hope as witnesses come forth, they will be open and transparent about the things that are underway, because today I think there's a sense that in essence we have a containment strategy, that we're in essence riding the clock out until this president leaves office. We have the same concerns right now in Ukraine, where we lured them west. They gave up 1,240 nuclear weapons. Obviously, Russia would not be moving into their territory today had they not done that. And yet, together with them and with the UK, we made comments about their territorial sovereignty, and yet those are being invaded, and it does appear that the administration is not committed to doing those things that are necessary to cause Ukraine to be able to at least defend itself. We were slow on intelligence. We are providing blankets. We are providing MREs, but we're not providing some of the defensive lethal support that's necessary. Let me just
providing
finish.
some counter battery radars and other kinds of things that are defensive. But, Senator, I understand the debate.
So I just want to say where it
very-
takes us on Ukraine, on Iran, is there's a strong sense of a lack of commitment, of a not willing to hold the line. And so I hope that we as a committee are going to be able to move forward on legislation that allows us to see that, to cause you to force, to cause us to force a process where you'll submit what it is you're doing with Iran. I know you've been working on it very heavily. I know you must be proud of that effort. And in the event you come to a resolution with Iran, I do think it's important that it is submitted, that we have the opportunity to approve it prior to sanctions being lifted and the regime actually dissipating. And I think the role of Congress to make sure that they're continuing to adhere to it is important. So those are comments I'd leave you with. We thank you for your service. I don't know of anybody who's worked harder to try to deal with the many crises that we have around the world. We thank you for your service here as a former chairman, and we wish you well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to be with you. Thank you.